Well, we're back working on the Bachmann outside frame consolidation, better known as Connie.
Connie's easier to remember.
Connie's much easier to remember. This week we're working on the couplers.
Oh boy, that looks like a lot of fun.
Oh, well, the question is what coupler to use. You'd think that would be a really straightforward question, but it just simply isn't.
No.
There's actually options here, and they have to be compatible with the other stuff that you're going to be running, and there's the key. You want it to work the way you want it to work, and you need it to be compatible with the other equipment on the railroad.
Right, otherwise you have a problem.
Otherwise you have a problem. And so Dawn and I have decided not to use the original coupler.
No.
Now this is really cool. This is when they coupled the Glenbrook into Eureka and Palisade number 4.
Right.
At the gathering of Victorian locomotives. Both of these engines were originally equipped with Lincoln pin couplers.
My fingers hurt looking at that.
Oh man, it'll take your fingers right off.
It will.
Yeah. Now the number 4 here has a knuckle installed in its pocket that would normally hold the pin, and so what they're going to be doing is using a split knuckle to put the link from the Glenbrook in with this pin.
Ooh.
Into that slot in the knuckle. So we're using 2 different coupling systems here. The original system used in America was Lincoln pin, just a pin that drops down through there with a link that goes between the 2 things being coupled together. Now there's the link. It's very long here on the Glenbrook. And they're going to drop that pin down through the opening in the end of the knuckle. But notice that the knuckle is sitting in a pocket that normally would hold a pin.
Yeah.
So that was another way of modifying a Lincoln pin locomotive to use knuckles, was just stick a knuckle into the pocket, drop a pin through that, and then use the knuckle. And then if you needed to go back to the pin, you could do that. In this case, they don't want to take the knuckle out, so they're going to drop the pin down to the end of the knuckle.
That's a really good idea so you don't lose a knuckle.
Now, here's the way things normally work on an American railroad. Just straight up knuckle couplers coupling in together.
Right.
And then the 2 knuckles are just simply locked together.
Right, sort of like fists holding hands.
Exactly. But interestingly, it's just a modification of Lincoln pin.
Yes.
There's actually a pin that drops.
Oh.
Just like on Lincoln pin. If we watch very carefully, slowly, as the cars couple together, you'll see the 2 pins drop. Only now they drop inside the knuckle and lock the knuckle closed.
Well, that's a lot safer.
That's a lot safer, but it still uses a pin.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
That's really interesting.
Now, to lift the pin back up out of there, you use these large handles on the equipment, and you pull up on that handle, and it simply lifts that pin back up out of the knuckle, releasing the knuckle. Just like that.
That's really, well, I won't say easy, but it makes sense.
Now, on model railroads, especially in the smaller scales, this is N. Well, you're just not going to do any of that.
No.
So they're using Katy couplers here and an uncoupling pick. So it's just a little piece of wood with a flattened point on the end of it that you can stick down into the knuckle and open the knuckle that way.
Well, on something that small, you'd have to have a jeweler's loop otherwise.
No kidding. Now, the Katy couplers can also be released magnetically, and back in the 50s and 60s, that's what people always did. But these days, people have really given up on the magnetic coupling. I mean, some people still use it.
Right.
But almost everybody just reaches in with a pick like that.
Yes.
And opens a Katy coupler. And almost everybody's using either a Katy coupler or some modification of a Katy coupler, simply because they work really well.
Well, and they look good, too.
They look great. Now, Katy couplers have been so successful since they were released, I think in the 1960s, that everybody's gone to them, and moreover, they're available for every conceivable scale and gauge combination.
Well, that's nice. That's wonderful.
They were originally made for HO, but they also came out with variations for HON3 and so on and so forth. And then in the 1970s, they came out for N scale, and just completely altered end scale forever. So Katy couplers is something that I used on my outdoor railroad back when I had the big garden railroad.
Oh, cool.
Because they're just neat and they're bulletproof and they look good. Now here we have some HO scale cars, or to the far left I should say OO.
Oh.
But look at all the different coupler combinations. This is one that was popular in Europe, and LGB used this on their large scale later on. But notice the far right there, there's a Katy coupler. But these are all different styles of coupler that have been popular and used by different manufacturers over the years. This one is the horn hook.
Horn hook.
And, well, it dates back a while, but it gained acceptance and became the NMRA standard.
I see.
And so all the equipment came delivered with that kind of knuckle. And, when I was a kid, it took me a while to figure it out, but half of the derailments I was getting on my HO scale railroad weren't caused by bad track. It was caused by bad couplers.
That just looks like, I don't like the looks of that at all.
Well, it's got that great big huge spring that pushes it over to one side, and that means that there's tension against your cars. One car's being pushed to the left and one car's being pushed to the right. And then going through a curve or something, it puts even more dynamic pressures on there, and it wants to just push the car right over the rail and off the track.
And onto the floor.
Now this one also has its coupler mounted on the wheel truck, and that will help the train go through sharper curves, but as it's going through the sharper curves, it will add even more weird pressures and dynamic tensions on there because of the geometry involved.
I can only imagine.
This is what became the standard in N scale, the Rapido. And when I first got into N scale, this is what everybody used because this is what all of the equipment came with. But when Katy came out with their coupler for N scale, they were fairly easy to replace. But then Katy started just releasing their own cars with the Katy couplers already on them. And that just sort of ended the Rapido. Yeah, and you hardly see these around anymore. So these Katy couplers are available in, like I say, pretty much every conceivable scale and gauge combination. And they even make some now for the larger scales that can work with the DCC to uncouple remotely from the DCC. This wire right here is what runs the magnetic system.
Oh, I wondered what that was for.
Yeah, so it's supposed to look like the brake line, which it doesn't.
Okay, well, it kind of missing part
kind
of it.
But yeah. But it's a big metal wire that hangs down, a steel wire that's attracted to the magnet. And so one knuckle's pushed one way and the other knuckle's pushed the other way. And so when these are coupled in together like this, if you park over the top of a magnet, it will force the two apart, and then you can pull forward, and the cars will uncouple.
Well, that's neat.
That's neat. Now, this is an N scale. This is yours.
This is my little caboose.
This is your little caboose. And look, it came already with Katy, and that's pretty common now with N scale.
Neat.
Everything is just delivered with a Katy coupler, so much so that now all the manufacturers have come up with their own variation on the Katy coupler.
Well, look at that.
So these are all, and they're all mostly compatible with each other.
I would hope so.
Now this, like I say, this is what LGB opted to use on their large scale. And some of our equipment, as you can see right here, has those. And, well, they don't look very prototype.
No, I bet they work, but they don't look that great.
Well, they work good up to a point, but the point is the problem. That little point that's sticking out, if you put that point on both ends of the car, they'll couple in, and then they almost can't uncouple it.
Oh, dear.
And so then you're stuck with hooking up your train so that you've got a loop at one end and a hook at the other.
That sounds complicated.
Well, it means you can't switch. It means
No.
when you're building up a train, all the cars have to face a certain direction.
Oh, dear.
Now, when the half-inch scale equipment came out, these are all Delton cars.
Right?
And notice they have knuckle couplers.
They sure do.
Delton developed a pretty decent knuckle coupler, unfortunately mounted to the wheel truck. And in order to accommodate the swing of that, they raised the whole car up about a half an inch.
Oh, that could be a problem.
And it just, the raised up car doesn't look good. So I converted all of mine to Katy couplers.
Ah, there you go.
And I was always happy with it. It worked just fine. It worked fine out in my garden railroad and everything. But when you get into this large size, that big wire hanging down just doesn't look as good as it does in the smaller scales.
It's kind of obvious is what it is.
It's obvious. Now these are two different Katy couplers that they make for number 1 gauge track for the large scale. The one on the left they call G scale for garden railroaders. And then the one on the right is for number 1 scale, the 1/32 scale people. And they're just different sizes. Same idea, just different sizes. Again, we got into that whole scale and gauge thing.
I'm still scratching my head, but go ahead.
So when doing these half-inch scale cars, I've always been torn. Do you use the smaller coupler or the larger coupler?
I'd probably just say, what looks good?
What looks good, and that's exactly what I did.
Oh.
So this is me attempting to fit the smaller coupler underneath a half-inch scale box car, and it looks just fine there.
It does.
But I think the larger ones look a little bit better.
Oh, okay.
But you could use either one, just
Right.
you can't mix them up at the end of the day. They're not going to be compatible with each other.
No, that's easy to see.
Now we get into the very large stuff, the 20.3 FN3. This is the Bachmann long caboose.
Oh, one after my heart.
And Bachmann came out with their own version of a coupler, which is a really nice coupler on there. And my original thinking was I'm going to convert all of my very large scale stuff to run on Bachmann couplers because I really like them. They're a little bit oversized, but they look really good and they work really well.
Well, it matches that caboose too because it looks like it means business.
Yep, and I just wished that they were a little bit smaller. Other than that, I love them.
Yes.
Now, except Bachmann did something that really confuses me. I think it's confused a lot of people. But they used that same knuckle on their big hauler series, and it's truck mounted.
Oh, dear.
And so in order to truck mount it, the cars have to be higher and the couplers have to be lower. And these couplers are so much lower than the body mounted ones that they use on the other equipment. To look at that.
Oh, that looks really good.
So these are just not compatible at all.
No, they're not.
You have to pick one standard or the other. And I hate truck mounted couplers, so it wasn't hard for me to pick a standard.
Well, it looks like a truck trailer hitch.
But then look at this. This is the logging equipment from Bachmann, which is part of the Spectrum line, and it has truck mounted couplers that are low.
Oh, dear.
It also has link and pin, and so a lot of people cut the coupler off and throw it away, and then they do link and pin on their logging railroad.
I see.
This is our logging equipment, and what a mess. So you can see we've got both link and pin and knuckle couplers, none of which are that silly low-mounted coupler. Now this is the AccuCraft AMS coupler.
Oh.
And this is actually my favorite coupler. It's similar to the Bachmann. It's very compatible with the Bachmann. You can use them together.
That's good.
Here's the Bachmann version, and it's basically the same coupler, only like I say, this one's oversized. It's just a little bit big, and they made it big so that it would be compatible with more coupler heights. So after consulting with the Oracle at Delphi, and Don and I said we want to keep compatible couplers on my equipment with his equipment and everything, let's pick one of these two couplers and use it on the entire railroad. And we picked the AccuCraft.
Oh, neat.
Because it's just a better looking coupler.
It is.
So we've established some rules for the railroad. All of the half-inch scale will use the large Katy coupler.
Right.
Not the small one, but the large one. And I've already started converting some of this half-inch scale equipment to the large coupler. And you'll notice by using the large coupler, it will couple in with the AMS coupler.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
They'll work together. Not that I have any intention of running the half-inch stuff with the 20th scale stuff because it looks silly. But it will work.
Well, that's good.
If for some reason we want to do it, it will work. And then on our logging railroad, if you've been following along with our logging railroad, it's 8 feet up in the air.
It is.
And link and pin, going up a ladder and trying to spend 15 minutes uncoupling cars using link and pin, it ain't working out.
It's not going to happen.
And I don't want to use these low-mounted Bachmann couplers. I don't think they look good at all. And so I've decided that what I'm going to do is, just like the Eureka had a knuckle plugged into its pin, its link and pin system, I'm going to stick the small Katy couplers into the pocket with the link and pin.
Oh.
And that should work out fine. And then
Should.
everything will work, and it'll be magnetic.
Ah.
And so then we don't have to climb up a ladder to uncouple cars.
Right.
We can just park over a magnet.
There you go.
So that's what I want to do up there. So the logging railroad will use all pin-mounted Kadee couplers in small size. And then the flagship of the railroad, the large-scale stuff, the 20th scale stuff, is all going to use Accucraft AMS couplers.
They look good.
They look good. They work really well. And so Dawn and I have started converting the Connies to using that, and we've declared that to be the standard for the 1/20th scale, AMS Accucraft.
Oh, nice.
And in a pinch, they'll actually work well with the Bachmann. So some of the cars, if they still have their Bachmann couplers on, as long as they're the high mount Bachmann, they'll work together just fine. And if you notice over to the right side of the screen here, there's an AMS coupled in with a Bachmann.
That looks good.
And so that works just fine. So anyway, this is how we chose what coupler to use.
Yes.
And now we can get down to the process of actually installing these couplers onto the Connies.
Right.
And that'll be our next show.
Right.
So that'll be fun. Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, pop over to the channel. And if you're not a subscriber, you want to subscribe so you can follow along. And the way to subscribe is with the blue button right there. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here on Sunday.
Right.
Because we got some fun stuff.
Right.
See you then.
Okay, bye.
Bye.